It's always so fun, this moment when you're watching the participants numbers go up and up and up. It's just that great feeling of everyone's coming to the party. I love that.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a minute once we get a chance for everyone to come on in from the waiting room.
What do you want?
Hey everybody, thanks for coming today. We're going to go ahead and get started now. I know we still have a few people flowing in, but we're just going to go over some housekeeping items right now. I am Maggie Bittner, Head of Education for SIA, and thank you for joining us today. As we've been talking a lot about over the last few months, we are focusing a lot of our efforts and resources on our inclusion journey this year. And I'm glad that everybody has taken the time and is invested as we are on this. I'm very happy to welcome Lisen Stromberg and Corey Jones from PrismWorks today. And they're going to be taking us through this leadership workshop. It is supposed to be interactive. So I'm going to let Corey go into the details of how exactly we're going to do that. But go ahead and open up your chat. And we are going to use that quite a bit. So Corey, I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here. Good, whatever part of the day you're in. I am currently in Texas, so it's afternoon. I know some of us are morning and some also afternoon. So good, whatever part of the day you're in. Welcome to the chat. As we get started and more people are joining, go ahead and in the chat function, share one takeaway you'd like to get from today's conversation. We want this to be engaging. We'll talk about that more later and what our expectations are, but just to get things started, maybe share where you're from and one thing you'd like to take away. There's also a Q&A function that you can use to ask pointed questions. Please use that throughout the chat as well. But let's go ahead and get started. So who are we? My name is Corey Jones, and I'm with my partner, Lisen Stromberg. I bring experience from creativity, branding, and culture. And Lisen is an author, an entrepreneur. She is just phenomenal on all of the talents and skills that she has. But we're both with PrismWork, which is a collective of experts working with companies in the areas of leadership, workplace, culture, governance, and brand. And all of us, each of us, bring these unique skills and experience and bridge them together to create a more inclusive and productive places, right? So we're working with companies to help them do that. So for instance, just looking at the screen, clearly you can see some visual differences between Lisen and myself, but we're not just going to talk about those obvious differences of me being Black, her being white, being a woman, and me being a man. Did you know there's some other diverse things about us? For instance, Lisen is an avid skier.
Yes, I am.
And I am not. So not yet. It's not that I have an aversion to the snow or I don't want to ski. I am really excited to do that. But you know, she brings some really great experience, and together we feel like we're going to have a really special time together. And so this is, you know, if there's any takeaway, we want you to understand that your employees are the fuel for your brand, your cause, your purpose, and your values. And we want to help you be able to tap into them and create an inclusive space for us. So we're going to talk about some challenging things. So let's set some guidelines and expectations, right? You're talking about some of the things you're expecting, peer-to-peer inclusion, and other things. Well, we also have some guidelines and expectations just because we feel this will help us have the most fruitful time together. So if you can, just please tap in. Let's be focused on what's at hand here and kind of shake off the previous meetings or the anxiety about the upcoming meetings and be fully present and engaged. I know it's challenging, it's tough, but this is how we get the most out of it. Also, we'd ask you to look for the best in others and in yourself as we engage and are interactive. We're wanting to see change, we're wanting to grow. So we'd ask for you to bring your best and look for the best in others. And then also give yourself permission to change your mind. This is probably one of the biggest challenges and expectations of all of them. By no means do Lisen and I believe that you're going to agree with everything that we say or share. However, let the challenge sit with you and give yourself permission to consider it and change your mind. So with that, let's move forward to the agenda.
So we've got, I sort of feel like we're at the top of the mountain, getting ready to ski down the mountain. We've got so much to discuss. We're going to be doing some interactive things, et cetera. But we're going to start with kind of managing the landscape, talking about the landscape in general, and talking a little bit about sort of what does this mean for you as a leader and how leadership has changed, and level set so you're ready to actually get into this place of all the things we want to share in those 5 steps of inclusive leadership. We're going to leave room for Q&A at the end, but we also invite you to use the Q&A throughout. If we see something we want to answer it right away, we'd love to. So don't hesitate to use that, as well as use the chat function. So here we go. I don't need to tell you right now that we are in the midst of a tectonic shift. You know this, right? We're seeing changing demographics. We're seeing, whites will be a minority by 2030 in this country. That's just one example. Socioeconomic, everything. We're seeing all of this. And of course, there's COVID that we're all dealing with. As leaders, that's the world outside, but there's also the world within your organization. And how do you navigate that? We've got a generational divide like we've never seen before. We have literally 5 generations in the workplace right now. Everyone talks about millennials and how they're shifting the values of what the workplace looks like. Gen Z even more so. And I think it was either last year or this year, I forget which year it was, where now actually millennials are the largest generation in the workplace. That alone is shifting everything. Moving on to technology breakthroughs. Look, AI, arguably AI is going to, they tell us it's going to replace all of us. I actually think this means that skills like being an inclusive leader, knowing how to lead just makes you and us that much more valuable. But there are other things that are happening. Social media has become a democratizing function. We would not have had Me Too without the benefit of social media. Arguably, Black Lives Matter wouldn't have gotten the attention it has if we didn't have social media. All of this has meant that employees now have a measure of power that they frankly didn't have before. It used to be siloed. We've got this rise of employee activism. I don't know if any of you have been reading about the Stan Richards scandal. Go check out Stan Richards or the Richards Group and how the 88-year-old leader misspoke, we could say, perhaps, talking about how something was too Black, an ad that they were creating was too Black. One of the employees didn't like that and actually messaged that out to the world. It got back to the client. And now that company, the Richards Group, which was the largest independent advertising agency in the country, just lost 5 of its major clients. That's an example of employee activism that we as inclusive leaders have the opportunity to prevent and create an environment where employees feel safe and engaged. So we'll be talking a lot about that today. And the other thing to think about is that the role of the company and corporations have changed. It used to be about shareholder value. I came of age in the 80s and 90s when it was all about shareholder value. Wall Street, greed is good. And now it's stakeholder value. All of the stakeholders matter. And that means you as an inclusive leader have an especially important role to play, which then means let's talk about leadership in general. Again, I came of age in the 80s and 90s, and leadership at the time was really very hierarchical, authoritarian, et cetera. But we're seeing this important shift, and COVID's only brought it into light. But by the way, this has been happening for a while. And what we're asking and demanding of our leaders is something different, which just puts all the more pressure on you as a leader, right, to make a difference. But here's what we know. Bain, McKinsey, many other consulting firms, and even our own research at PrismWork has told us that 21st century leaders, those leaders who get this right, actually really deliver on the bottom line. They're able to drive decisions twice as fast as kind of old school leaders. In fact, surprisingly, I know it's hard to believe, they actually are so efficient in this that they actually have fewer meetings and fewer days spent on meetings because they're able to really be inclusive in their processes. They actually drive innovation in a way that we've never seen before. They consider 3 times more alternatives, which means you as a leader actually are being more efficient. You're more inclusive. You think about a wide range of views, and that actually delivers 87% of better choices over time. And then, of course, you've all heard about inclusive leadership driving bottom line results and inclusion driving bottom line results. We're going to provide you with this deck by then, by the way. I think I mentioned that in chat. And you're going to be able to see how all of that information and all these resources play itself out. So you'll see lots of research in that as well. So look, it's hard though, right? It's really hard to be an inclusive leader right now. And you all have questions. We're so grateful for those of you who took the survey. We got lots of great questions. But we love this quote. Corey found it and it says, most people are afraid of the level of vulnerability and daring required to take action. It's like skiing down the slope for the first time, right? So let's just start with asking you, can you in the chat function share with us some of the things that are keeping you or driving perhaps anxiety around being an inclusive leader? What are the things that might be holding you back from being the leader you possibly could be? And you can just make a comment in the chat and share with us.
Yep. And, you know, and also where you can hear and see what other people are doing, right? Or feeling and have some of that shared experience of kind of where some of the challenges are.
Mary Lou shared that they recruit women and minorities, but don't retain them because they don't feel they belong. Spot on. We'll talk a little bit about that. Anybody else have thoughts or ideas about what's holding you back? Some of you shared, and we'll talk a little bit later in the research, that you felt like it was hard to be inclusive because you don't have people in your world that feel diverse. We'll talk about that. Yep, a less diverse team.
Fear of speaking about my personal experiences. That's right. 20 years of implicit bias and being told I'm right. Yeah, it's when we get into a perch where everything is exactly like we would like for it to be and reflecting, you know, what we'd like, means that there might be some blind spots there. Yeah. Feeling overwhelmed and knowing where to get started.
I know, it's really hard. It can be really confusing. Yes, the right language, right? So often I'm afraid to say things because I'm afraid I'm going to appear racist or sexist or whatever it might be, right? We hold ourselves back sometimes from being vulnerable, right? Board members not thinking we have a diversity issue. Oh, we see that all the time in our research. We do extensive research with clients and customers, and we find that often there's people who just don't believe it.
So those are great thoughts. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. There are 3 things that we see that keep people from actually being inclusive leaders. Those things are fear, as you've mentioned, change, being vulnerable, maybe not feeling as skilled. Some of it's ego. We tend to really reward charismatic leaders. And oftentimes there's an inverse correlation between charisma and competence. There's really interesting research on that, actually. Finally, sometimes we may actually be well-intentioned, but don't actually have the measurement tools to really be able to ensure our efforts are being delivered in the right way. So let's now dive into the 5 skills that are going to actually help increase your leadership.
Yes, as Lisen mentioned earlier, you know, the world is changing around us. And so here are some steps that we need, that we would like for you to consider on your journey to being a more inclusive leader, right? First, it is about shifting your mindset. You know, a lot of the things that Lisen talked about are happening externally and they're affecting us all individually. So how do we shift what's inside of us to better cope and deal with all of the change that's happening and bring a diverse team with, you know, within us? These are the things. Shift your mindset. And then we talked to, if you've heard from Lieber Clemens in the previous webinar, she talks about the 4 C's, being curious, being courageous, being committed, and being connected. So we're going to talk about all of those things, but first is shift your mindset. Yes, there's
Let me
changing.
just say, Corey, let me just say, hey, everybody, I'm driving the train and clearly not doing a very good job. So bear with us, all right? Thank you for that.
It's okay.
I'm shifting mindset, growth
shifting
mindset.
the mindset is that we're getting somewhere good, right? And so shifting the mindset, there's two that we want to talk about in specific, or a few that we want to talk about in particular. That's growth versus fixed is first. And Stanford Professor Carol Dweck has explained in her book, Mindset, she talks about those that have a growth mindset are the leaders that we need. And, this is so important. Growth, if we're seeing the environment change around us, and if we stay the same, we're going to be overtaken, right? When you attach to failure as a limit to your ability, or think you don't have the opportunity to grow or do new things, then the rate of change that happens around you becomes scary. So embrace it. Embrace the change, seek that growth mindset. Remember when you first learned to ski or snowboard, it's that beginner mindset. That's the heart of the growth mindset, right? Continue. I'm speaking like I know because I don't ski, but I'm assuming that.
I've told you that story.
That's right. And we talked about, when you first doing that, it's kind of scary. So how do you're going to fall? You got to get back up. You got to, figure out which moguls you're going to, take, and all of these things, and learn the vocabulary. It's challenging, it's tough, and it's on top of it, it's cold. Yet you've stuck with it and fought through it. Let's continue that when it turns on the journey of inclusivity. And where are we growing? We're growing to a place of abundance, where you have to set the culture for success for more diverse talent by shifting the culture. If you're thinking about making a place of belonging for people of color, for minorities, for immigrants, you have to consider shifting not just your mindset, but working to shift the mindset of your organization, where it moves from avoiding risk and managing the status quo to embracing risk and managing to opportunity, by getting away from this idea that there will never be enough for me, or there's a smaller piece of the pie, or I'm going to lose something, or we collectively are going to lose something as a group, by inviting others. Abundant people say there's enough for everyone. Everyone can win. Everyone can eat. We're driven by gratitude, not by fear, and striving to grow instead of being afraid of being replaced. This is about creating a really open space for everyone to flourish. And literally, you can't be a leader of the future without a perspective of abundance.
So I was telling Corey, I was telling Corey my own personal story and the difference between growth and abundant mindset, right? So I don't know about you, but when I was a little girl and I wanted to learn to ski, I remember so well, my dad was a great skier, and we skied at Squaw Valley, and he skied chute 70. He would leave the family to go ski chute 75, right? That was off of KT. That was like so amazing. And I had a growth mindset. I was going to be as good as my dad and be able to ski down that mountain with him. That's a growth mindset. If you're a skier, or a snowboarder or whatever, you've got that growth mindset. The abundant mindset, though, is the person who says, I love fresh tracks, but I'm going to share those fresh tracks with others, right? We want fresh tracks. Everyone wants that, right? But if we say, and my father used to go and say, hey, everybody, fresh tracks, best today on Solitude. He used to go up on the tram and tell everybody where they'd find fresh tracks because he knew the mountains so well. And I thought that was about abundance. He wasn't holding fresh tracks for himself. He was making sure we can share them for all. And that is really the core of the two differences here. Corey, anything else? Or
yeah, in regards to this, just in regards to diversity and inclusion, CTI did some research on what majority men really think about D&I. And we're going to talk about a few barriers to inclusion later, but one of the core one is resistance to change. And resistance to inclusion, the belief, when we talked about it, that there's only so much pie to go around, that if we let women in, or Black people or immigrants in there, there'll be less room for me and mine. And so that perspective is not about abundance. And it's not completely about abundance, it's about a belonging, about understanding what we will gain, what new markets we'll tap into, what new opportunities and perspectives and experiences we can experience when we open up our perspective to being more abundant. Instead of thinking about what we will lose, we have to have clarity on what we'll gain if we're going to be inclusive.
And that's the foundation for an inclusive leader. So shifting your mindset is foundational to all of this. So we're going to ask you, in the last 6 months, gratitude is one of the core elements of abundant mindset. How have you are all working with teams. We're able to see most of you are senior leaders in your companies and divisions. How have you expressed gratitude to your team as a leader? How have you shared your gratitude? Can you guys share some of that in the chat?
Yeah, this has been challenging for in so many ways for people in regards to the social unrest and all of the upheaval, but just also the pandemic. How have you tapped into your team and expressed gratitude for them, or gratitude for where you are, and seeing the opportunity that's ahead of you? Have you done it? If you haven't, then this is a great prompt for you to do that, right? We'd love to see you share.
Group meetings. Yeah. One of the ways I've been seeing leaders do it is to start meetings by not just saying, how are you, but ask that question. What are you grateful for today? What happened this week that made you feel grateful? Just setting that tone alone is an amazing thing. Yeah. Thank yous, acknowledgement, reflecting on the progress. This is great.
That's awesome.
Publicly sharing, great jobs. Emails of encouragement. It's so funny. One of the things that I know that COVID has taught so many of us is that real power of communication. We may have been thinking all of these things before, but now we're actually communicating them in ways we're forced to, because we're not right next to people anymore. And so that's what's really impressive to me, is seeing people really rise to communicate. And inclusive leaders, a foundational skill for inclusive leadership is communication. And so expressing that gratitude, you guys are out there doing it. That's really good.
I'm seeing some great comments in here, using the internal ways to give awards on the HR platform. A lot of corporations, a lot of businesses have these tools and aren't using them. These are great ways that you can have gratitude for your team, taking the team out for into sessions, reflecting on progress and the shared vision. It's awesome. These are amazing ways to be an abundant leader, abundant perspective.
So let's get to that next step. Thank you for sharing, everybody. Let's get to that next step. So we talked about the 4 C's that if you had a chance to see Lieber Clevens, our colleague, on one of the town halls, she talked about those 4 C's. And the first of those 4 C's is be curious. Look, if you're not an inclusive leader by definition is curious. An inclusive leader needs to start with understanding themselves. All of this starts from your heart and from this place of who you are. None of us like to acknowledge and know and say that they've got biases. Who wants to hear it? But we're literally wired. We're neurologically wired to have biases. That's how we survived in the savannah. So you've got biases. One way to understand your biases, because sometimes it's hard to recognize them, is to actually go out and take the implicit bias test at Harvard. They've done an amazing program, and you can just type in Harvard implicit bias test. It's free and you can do it. So I took it and I thought it was really fascinating. It turns out that I'm the daughter of a woman who didn't have a college education, and she deeply valued education. So surprisingly, I don't have a lot of other biases, but it turns out I'm biased towards education. I value education deeply. I didn't even know that that was embedded in my psyche, but it certainly was. Another thing you can do is understand your privilege. I don't know if any of you read the New York Times. This last Sunday, front page news was the discussion on the word privilege and how so many people are uncomfortable with the notion of white privilege, white supremacy, et cetera. The truth is we all have privilege. And so understanding where your privilege is and owning it is very important. We love this wheel of privilege and power that was created by Sylvia Duckworth. And you can see all of this. Look at it. There's formal education, ability, sexuality, neurodiversity. When we think about privilege, it's not just the monolithic white privilege. It could be any of these things. Again, talking about my mom, she was a blue-eyed, blonde-haired woman, straight woman who seemingly had a lot of privilege. She grew up in war-torn Norway. She's an immigrant. She didn't speak English very well. She never graduated. She barely graduated high school, right? She wasn't rich by a long shot. She had mental health issues. She had addiction issues. She had some disabilities. So when you look at this wheel, what outside looked like a woman filled with privilege, in fact, had a woman who had so much diversity within her, so much neurodiversity, so much diversity. This is a great tool that you can use for yourself, and it's a really great tool to share with your teams. We've actually had teams who've taken this and learned about each other's privilege on team exercises. It's a really great way to get to know each other. Another privilege exercise is the privilege walk. It's something you actually need to do in person, hard to do online, but you can Google privilege walk and see in person, see what's happening. Again, we'll link it in the end. So it's not just about knowing yourself, it's about knowing others. And knowing others starts with questions. You have to be curious. You have to come with that growth mindset, that curious mindset, that beginner mindset. But interestingly, when we ask questions, when we're trying to find things out, we actually find ourselves not really being fully present for the listening of it, side of it. I don't know how many of you have been in that situation where you're in a conversation, you can't wait to get the next word in. So you're not really listening to hear, you're listening to speak, right? Have you done that? I know I've done that. That's called internal listening. The next level is focused listening, where you're actually listening to hear because you actually want to kind of understand kind of specifically what's going on. But there's a third and deeper level of listening, and that level is what we call global or whole body listening. And that is the core of an inclusive leader. To be able to listen, to be able to be present, to be able to get beyond your own biases and privilege, to understand with empathy the person you're talking to, that is a level of listening that we all want to aim for. Now, it's hard sometimes to do that all the time, and there may be a million reasons why. I really encourage you this next week to do your own personal test. Track your own listening skills, track your own listening processes, and figure out when are you listening to hear, listening to speak, or truly listening to understand. That's an exercise you can do for yourself that might be very productive. Now we want to do an exercise together. Corey? Here's our adventure, people. We're going down the mobile.
Yes,
step into run.
So remember, I'm going to point back to our guidelines. We want you to, where normally you haven't participated, I'm going to ask you and challenge you to change your mind and participate. We're going to do something really fun called Step Into the Circle. It's a virtual exercise. You can do this in person or virtual. We're going to do this virtually, of course. If you could, for me, turn on your annotate function by going to View Options at the top of your screen and clicking on Annotate, and there should be a toolbar that comes up. And what we'll need you to do is click on Stamp and pick a symbol.
Let's go slowly, because this took me a while to understand. Corey's much more savvy than I am on these things. So Corey, we go up to the nav bar, right? Pull down the section that says
on View Options, and you go to Annotate. Make sure that is clicked, and you'll see a toolbar appear on your screen that says Mouse, Text, Draw, Stamp, Arrow. Oh, you don't have Annotate as an option.
Susan doesn't have Annotate as an option. I can only select Zoom. I can only select Zoom options. Oh, bummer. All right, team, we're going to explain to you this exercise.
So if you click, there's an arrow, View Options, check arrow, Fit to Window, all of the view, under Exit Full Screen, or it should be an Annotate. Okay, maybe not.
So let's describe the exercise.
So what we'll do, the idea is so we can maybe raise our hands, or if there's a way to do it. The idea is to step into the circle, if you can do it. Stamp in the circle if you played this before. Stamp outside the circle if you've not played this before, done step to the circle before.
It sounds like a lot of people might not have this option. So, oops, sorry guys, again. Looks like we can't outside. Maybe we could actually put it in the chat function then, since we can't do this.
Let's do that. So I'm going to start by, this is some questions to get to know the group, right? So let's start by saying, step into the circle or raise your hand if you like eating sushi.
Maybe you could just type in.
Yeah, type in, yes.
In. I love it.
Lots of ins, love it. Great.
I'm in.
Good job. I love the Hey, also, if you're out, we want to know that as well. If you do not
Yeah.
like, go ahead.
If you don't like out, nice,
I
Wendy.
understand. Perfect. Really good.
My husband likes sushi as long as we can get pizza afterwards.
Okay, lots of ins on that one, a few outs. We're gonna move on. Go ahead and step into the circle or say in if you prefer downhill skiing to snowboarding. So, okay, lots of ins. Oh,
Out.
oh, we got a number of snowboarders. Okay.
I love it.
In, out. Great. Okay. Next, let's step into the circle if you prefer beach over snow. So beach is in, snow is out. Out.
Oh, in. Oh, look at all these ins.
Okay.
In the Snowsports Association, we got lots of people who are
in on
beach,
out on snow. Okay.
I love it.
Nice. Okay. Step into the circle or say in if you speak another language. Out if you don't. Out. Okay.
Halfway learning.
Love
nice.
it.
That's the growth mindset right there.
Yep. Okay, here's a real one. Step into the circle if you had to take loans to go to college. In. Yep, out. Okay, nice mix. Definitely in.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Step into the circle if you've ever had homophobic, sexist, or racist comments at work. If you've heard those, step in. If not, out, in. Okay. Lots of ins. Yeah, that is
unfortunately in.
Exactly, unfortunately in. That is a very common occurrence to hear those things. Again, another step into the circle if you've ever felt judged by someone at work.
Looks like we're all in on that one.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, right? And what that feels like. I love that we've adapted and creative on the fly, this chat in and out, step into the circle. It's a new way. This is great. Next question, 2 more questions. We're almost done. Next question, step into the circle if you've ever judged someone else at work. In.
I love all these truth tellers. I hope not. Yeah.
Yeah, we all hope not. That's good. Lastly, step into the circle if you wish to be a part of a community where you feel safe, valued, and respected by others.
Oh, that was easy, right?
And please, exactly.
So what's beautiful about this exercise is in just not even 5 minutes, we were able to create community across this group, right? We were able to get to know each other a little bit better. We were able to actually create an understanding of where some of our privileges were. Some of us had to have loans for college, some of us didn't. You can create a whole series of activities like this, a whole series of ways to get to know your teams, to know your colleagues, to create a deeper sense of connection. This is just one of the ways and one exercise we encourage you to sort of adopt and figure out how can you. Brandon doesn't want to be part of a community, I guess. Oh, well, Brandon.
This is not the webinar for you, Brandon.
We'll include you anyways. The point is that, good, Brandon. The point is that our goal is to make sure that you do the work, and the work includes creating a place of belonging, and creating belonging means understanding your colleagues. Let's move on.
Thank you so much for participating in that.
So great.
Hopefully you were able to see those other connections that you have with others.
So our next step is about being courageous, and you guys just modeled that in the most beautiful way. You were able to be courageous and be vulnerable. I want to share with you something that we thought was really interesting. When we did the research, and again, thank you to those who answered, 78% of the respondents indicated that you felt comfortable talking about issues of race, gender, and other issues related to race and inclusion. That's amazing. That's incredibly high. It's unusually high, which just speaks to how wonderful you humans are. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being in the world. We love that. But here it's really interesting. What we found is actually 64% of you reported that you've not increased your efforts to connect with diverse peoples in the last 6 months. So that tells us two things. That tells us either A, you've got such a diverse community, you don't really need to, reach out, and that in that diverse community, you're able to have really challenging questions and conversations, those uncomfortable conversations, if you will. Or you're having a great conversation amongst all your people and friends who look and act and are just like you, right? So the real work of diversity and inclusion is about getting out of your comfort zone. It's about really knowing yourself and getting out of that comfort zone and trying something different. Recently, when we could actually socialize together, I was invited to go to a luncheon. There were 30 women in the room, and I was the only white woman in the room. And it was this amazing experience for me. That was, frankly, here I am. It was the first time in my life I had ever been the only white person in the room. And that experience of the other, and that experience that my friends in that room experienced every single day was eye-opening. Can you find a way to be the only in the room? Maybe you can reach out and go to an activity. Of course, right now it's hard to do it, but even if it's online, that's a way of getting out of your comfort zone. Another thing is just to try being a beginner of something, right? Remember that first little 4-year-old Lisen on that ski slope aiming for a shoot 75? Where could you be a beginner? And I wonder, is just maybe in the chat, have you in this last 6 months since COVID started, have you done something to be a beginner, to get into that beginner mindset? And how has that impacted you? Maybe you could share. Somebody said that they're learning, I think it was Wendy said she's learning Spanish or another language. Sorry, I don't know if it was Spanish. I'm aiming to learn Spanish. Did you guys do something where you're a beginner? Have you been getting out of your comfort zone and trying something new, learning something new during COVID? Could you share with us on that? Anybody? Mountain biking for the first time, awesome. It is Spanish, great, I'm trying. Wake surfing, I have a friend who leads a wake surfing club. Brooke, reach out to me, she's doing all kinds of cool things. Learning to sew. My mother used to sew, I used to admire that. Participated in a webinar, rock on Karen, that's great, congratulations. Look at all these great things you guys have done and been a beginner. You're getting out of your comfort zone. And that is another way that you're being inclusive. It forces you to be inclusive when you try something new because you're in that beginner mindset. The other thing I encourage you to do is ask those vulnerable questions, right? That's again, that beginner mindset. Ask vulnerable questions of people that aren't like you. And just say, you don't necessarily have to answer, but I'd be so curious, and would you be willing to share with me your experience about X, Y, and Z, or your opinion about X, Y, and Z? And you might not like the answers you get, but having the courage to ask them is so powerful and important. It's really important to take a stand right now. It really is important to get over being a bystander. Number one, I guess we get a lot of number one things for being an inclusive leader, and that includes not being a bystander anymore. You might have to take a stand that you don't agree with everybody. You might have to take a stand that makes you uncomfortable. And it's really important to have clarity on where you stand and what you believe in. And the other thing is the courage to amplify diverse voices. It takes courage to step back and listen. We talked about that before, and encourage others to listen and then help amplify those voices. We invite you to really do that, take a stand and amplify. That's a courageous act. And then those are personal stories, but what is your corporation doing? What is your workplace doing? We are swimming in white privilege, a white construct, whatever it is. And those policies and programs and governance solutions that we have in our workplace, those were built around a certain mindset. They were actually built around, in the 1950s, they were built around the ideal worker. And that ideal worker was white, male, straight. Typically, he had a caregiver at home to take care of the kids. And so all of those programs that we built, those programs that actually are the governance policies that we're living with today were built around that model. So looking at those governance policies and figuring them out matters, but also understanding how is inclusion affecting your workplace. Look, here are some barriers that happen right now. We tend to hire. Have you guys ever heard the concept, oh, I don't want to lower our standards? I hear this a lot. Or is she a culture fit? We tend to hire whom we know. That's called affinity bias. We're more likely to hire, mentor, or provide customer service to people who are similar to us, right? Or provide quality customer service. So hiring, engaging with people you know is a huge barrier to inclusion. There's something called attribution bias, and that's when we actually are likely to give someone credit, less likely, sorry, let me back up. If someone doesn't look like us, attribution bias means that we actually don't give them credit for the work they do, and we're more likely to punish them for their mistakes, which means we under-index on feedback and we over-index on penalties. Somebody in the list said that you hire women and people of color and you find that you can't retain them. I'd be really curious to do a deeper dive into, is there attribution bias happening in your workplace? Is there feedback being given? Are you not giving enough feedback because we're afraid to be perceived as racist or sexist or whatever it might be? And as a result, and over penalizing for mistakes or punishing for mistakes, something to be aware of. Toxic behavior. Yeah, most of us don't want to deal with toxic behavior, but it's in there. It's in there. We saw this list of people who said that they had heard racist, sexist comments in the workplace. But what are we doing? Inclusive leaders really step up and say, they take a stand and say, that's not acceptable. We tend to avoid it. It's called out-group avoidance. We don't want to necessarily be that person, but it's real. And we have to work on being the person who says, this isn't okay. It's really important to track your data. Data is a very powerful tool to help you figure out what's really happening. If, for example, you can hire, which is great, women and people of color, and you're finding their leave, get the data. It may turn out that they're leaving at a certain age. Well, many women might leave when they have children. What's going on there? Is there motherhood bias in your company? Maybe you have one department that they're leaving from. So there might be some toxicity in that department. Getting the data and insights can help you make really smart decisions. The other thing we're seeing, which we're really thrilled by, is the public effort to make diversity metrics live, right? We're seeing company after company. It's very big here. I live in Silicon Valley. It's very big here in Silicon Valley, where the tech companies are really saying, this is important and it's going to matter and I'm going to do it. So they're being public and they're willing to take a risk. That takes courage. We invite you to look at your company and figure out, can you do that? So let's stop and ask this question. What is one courageous act that you have done in the past 6 months to increase inclusion, either in your personal life or in your workplace? And maybe workplace, since we were just talking about inclusion. Is there something you've specifically done that you've seen that you've made a difference or made an effort? Maybe it didn't succeed, but at least you tried. Can you share?
I think we got, some of those were probably covered in the learning the Spanish or, engage with more strangers. Yeah.
Working with our DEI pillar team. Awesome. That's great. Stepped out of a DEI group when I recognized I had more work to do. Wow, that takes courage. Hosted a DEI webinar. Came out as transgender. Congratulations, Jim.
Congrats.
Welcome to the world. Inclusion training, frontline protests. Wow. Dylan, that's hard. Reaching out to
Insisted our CEO and board president participate on our DEI committee. That is tremendous courage, Alan. Thanks for doing that, because it does take that leadership presence and influence in order to create that culture. They set the tone for the culture and belonging.
It's great. Look at this list. Look at what your colleagues are doing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Good. At board meetings, it's great and really important to get the board on board. Thank you for sharing. Let's move on. Corey?
So when it comes to being connected, we've been curious and courageous. How do we find those like-minded people and connect with them and make progress, right? How do we move forward? So again, thank you again for responding to the survey. Only 28% of you reported that you've increased your efforts to connect with diverse people. Why? The reasons you've given, and I think I saw some of these in the chat. We saw some of these in the chat as well. Living in predominantly white communities and the challenge due to COVID. The COVID has brought some challenges for us to be able to connect with people in person, but it's also unlocked a lot of more opportunities to connect with diverse people, over these diverse issues of race, right? How often is would a group of people like this be able to get together, talk about inclusion and diversity in the middle of their workday with people who are engaged and active and excited about doing it and can connect with each other? It's not, before now, it wasn't as readily available. And now that is possible to be able to do that. And also just thinking through diversity. Yes, race is very important. It's top of mind for just about everyone right now. But there are other ways to connect with diverse peoples. As we talked about, there's diverse forms of privilege. There's also diverse forms of, our identity. There's socioeconomic diversity, gender, LGBTQ, neurodiversity. Some people have listed up to 34 different aspects of our identity that could be diverse and differentiated. Find out how to connect with those and understand those. And also just kind of COVID has also unlocked, with more and more companies working remote or having remote offices. I don't know if you've heard, but there's this boom in Zoom towns where people are starting to live where they want to play. So there's been growth in areas next to national parks and mountains and rivers and nature. So those communities are going to start to burgeon and get more diverse as people who have affinity for snow sports want to live there, and their opportunities for employment are free. They're able to do that and move. So those opportunities should grow in the coming time to do that as well.
Somebody asked, Brooks asked, please define neurodiversity. And Brooks, I just want to honor your question. So neurodiversity is the notion that many of us have different ways our brain works. So I have a son who has ADHD. He's neurodiverse. He's figured out tools to help him succeed and thrive in high school and college and ultimately the world at large. But understanding that our brains are different and that we bring different brains and different capacities to how we work is really important. One thing that I know at PrismWork, some of us are morning people, some of us are evening people. That's a neurodiversity issue, right? When are we best at our skill? Understanding that and understanding what works for your team around simple things, around how your brain works, can be surprisingly inclusive.
I also Richard said something really important here. I want to amplify, just as a person of color and a member of the LGBT community, it's very interesting to hear everyone talk about troubles with retention and attracting. It's a lot about recognizing when people are raising their hands and saying, consider me, right? It goes back to that curious and that active listening that Lisen talked about, of hearing your people, tapping into them, because they are speaking up. No one typically sits into a hostile environment without saying something. So if you're employing diverse people, if you have already taken that step, don't waste it, and encourage inclusivity by listening to them, by hearing them, by having them speak up and taking action. Here's some other ways to get connected, is just getting creative. Again, you can invite diverse groups to partner with you for an event or project. You can partner with the competitor, like to address a common cause. There's other groups like Color of Change or Human Rights Campaign that can send you newsletters to give you active things each day. Ask your employees. Your employees are a huge resource for ways that you can connect with others and be advocates for causes you care about. Use Snowsports Industry Association, the resources they're providing, webinars like this and other links. Continue to use them, continue to press them to bring more. Create a company employee resource group. Start to give your employees a platform and an opportunity to connect. not only gather their thoughts, but be able to collectively communicate with you as a leader of what they care about. And you can also not just hear from them, but be engaged with them, take part in their events, celebrate their culture of diversity, and then ask for reverse mentorships. As leaders, we're asked to lead people and help them get better, but that can go in reverse as well, whether that's someone who's maybe a boomer or Gen X needing to connect with a millennial to say, hey, how are things shifting? Show me how to do a TikTok for the business, or give me an understanding of things that we can do to connect to people like you, to bring more people to the slopes. Get a reverse mentorship. That doesn't mean just ask one-off questions. Cultivate a relationship of connection and communication with these people. Those are some great ways to get connected. And lastly, be committed. Lisen.
So here's the thing. An inclusive leadership, and you guys are all going to find it. What I'm so impressed with is what we've seen these last 6 months. We have seen people who have never before really thought about these issues rise to hear and thinking about these issues. That's amazing. Being an inclusive leader is not a one-off. It is a daily practice, a daily journey of how you can lead. It is 21st century leadership. It's how you can be different in this new world of work. And that means being committed. It means understanding that you are in a new world, that we're all in a new world, and that we can't do this, one webinar, this one DE&I thing, that the very notion that DE&I is separate from the core business is so old school, right? We need to change our whole mindset on this. I want to share with you one of my heroes, Ursula Burns. She is the daughter of an immigrant as well. Her mom was from Panama. She was a single mom, managed to get herself, Ursula got herself to college, managed to get a job at Xerox in engineering, which was pretty unusual back in the day, especially for a Black woman, and rose through the ranks to become CEO. The thing that's really interesting is that when you ask Ursula about kind of the isms of racism and sexism, her answer is, they're like air. It's everywhere. And it's so important to understand this structurally. So, she said, when people ask me, did you ever experience racism or sexism? Her answer was, of course. But the better question to ask is, when have you not experienced it? As a leader, as an inclusive leader, knowing the air that we're breathing and knowing what that is ground zero for all of the things that you're going to do, but also creating a space where that air is healthy and clean and beautiful. That's the goal. So we're going to ask you, before we go into some questions, I want to leave some time for Q&A. Can perhaps, and Dylan's already done this, God bless you, Dylan, you've already said, what is one thing that you can do, that your company can do, or even if you're just with your team can do, to increase diversity and inclusion and belonging in the next 3 to 6 months? Dylan has recommended In Solidarity CEO Pledge. We love that. We're seeing more of that. Is there something else that your team can do or your company can do that will be really on that journey to evolving? Any suggestions? We talked about transparency. We talked about, we know some companies are signing up for Syndio, which is about pay equity and about tracking how they're paying people. That's another inclusion leadership thing that you can do. I'm an advisor to a company called Dandy. They track your diversity and inclusion behaviors and actions at your company. They're doing amazing things. There's lots of things that companies can do. Looking at the governance we've talked about. You're doing Daryl Butler, great, don't know him, but I'm sure he's amazing, right? Conducting small group sessions. What we find actually oftentimes is if you look within your own company, your employees know so much. Remember that conversation we had at the beginning about employee activism? Learning from them, Corey talked about reverse mentorship, learning from them and what they want and how they're changing is huge. See what can come from the bottom up. Leadership talking about it and taking a stand, absolutely right. De-escalation training, right? How do we get to a place where we can have these difficult conversations, but not have it be so triggering? That's rich and important. Anything else that we can do that your company can commit to or that you can commit to as a leader? That's a great idea, Ronald. Ronald's talking about trying to, if you have diverse, for example, I can't tell you how many venture capitalists reach out to me and say, Lisen, I know you know diverse women in your community. Can you make introductions? Because we want more women on our boards. So I'm happy to make introductions. Oh my gosh, talk about amplifying. And so one of my favorite things to do is introduce really talented, diverse women to startups and to venture capitalists who are looking to actually diversify their board set. It's one of the ways I get a thrill when I know that somebody I recommended has got on board. It's great. Nice. I love that. Susan's saying, I'm our HR leader, and the one thing I committed to is linking the expectation of inclusion to our mission statement and EO policy for all new hires. That is so good. That's embedding it into the systems, and that's what we're talking about. That's great. Build space in the budget for Jedi work. Ooh, I'm dying to know what Jedi work is. DE&I training, right? To understand our own implicit biases. Yes, that's great. I love some of these solutions. We'd love to answer. We've got just a few more minutes and we want to honor and respect your time. Is there anything else that specific we can answer for you? Is there any kind of feedback or tools that we can recommend? What can we do to help you be the inclusive leader we all need? Any questions you have? We can just do it in the chat as opposed to the Q&A. Looks like we're using chat. Thanks, Susan, for joining us.
Thank you all. This was a great time. Hope you appreciate it and got some value. We've certainly enjoyed spending the time with you. Thank you for bringing your full self and being present and engaged. Normally, sometimes you see those chat functions and it's crickets, but you all were very engaged and plugged in, and we so appreciate that. This was amazing.
Corey and I have posted our emails right here. Feel free to reach out if you have questions. We're happy to be resources for you, happy to help in any way we can. We know, again, that this is a journey. It's not a one-off. And so diverse recruiting. Dylan, yes, we have tons of ideas for diverse recruiting. It depends on what you're looking for. We have tons of resources to give you and recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us. I'll put it in here so you have it as well.
Well, thank you so much, Lisen and Corey, for taking us through this exercise. It was great. It was great to see how many people are, excited and involved and willing to do the work that needs to be done to make, changes. I really appreciate everything that you shared and putting your contact information there so anybody can reach out to you. Also, if somebody did not miss this or like to share it, we have recorded it and it'll be on the website later today. And we encourage that to share that with your teams. And, reach out to either Lisa and Corey or myself at SIA. And, we'll be happy to get you anything we can. But I know a lot of people have 3 o'clock meetings or wherever you are.
I hope to see you all on the slopes.
Absolutely. Thanks all.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.